on that note, let's just move to this. In South Africa, protests and vigilantism are nothing new. However, the recent spate makes one even wonder if communities in South Africa are actually under attack. I'm now joined by Associate Professor of Anthropology at the University of the Free State. That's Mr. Theodore Petrus, to provide some analysis on the subject. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Petrus. And that's the question. Are communities under siege in South Africa?
I think that many communities would perceive that they are. If one looks at the levels of crime and criminality that is going on in many communities in the country, if one also looks at the current state of the SAPS and everything that's going on there, it seems that many communities are feeling that they don't really have the support of formal law enforcement structures in order to assist them to keep levels of crime under control. And the problem is that we do have a historical context that we can refer to, where we have seen that what's happened in the past in communities that felt themselves threatened by crime and didn't feel safe and secure in the police to be able to deal with these criminal activities,
right,
that these communities tended to resort to their own forms of policing, which took the form of vigilantism and even incidences of mob justice.
Yeah.
And the thing is that we see this appearing time and time again. And it just suggests that the same problems, conditions, and causes that originally led communities down this path of vigilantism and taking the law into their own hands have not yet been addressed.
And let's talk about that. Let's talk about mob justice, for instance, because we're seeing some visuals coming in there as well. Zandspruit being the latest incident where we saw community members taking matters into their own hands. Will mob justice ever be justifiable, especially with the reasons that you also provide there to say that community policing forums often don't either show up on time or show any interest in protecting communities? Police stations sometimes would give, excuses such as they do not have enough vans or enough resources to answer to some of these concerns in communities timelessly. So will mob justice ever be justifiable?
We need to see mob justice and what we can call community policing or alternative policing strategies as a consequence of a much bigger problem. And the bigger problem I have briefly referred to earlier when I mentioned the historical context of the tensions that exist between communities and formal law enforcement structures. And we can look at the example of what happened in the Western Cape with the emergence of people against gangsterism and drugs. And that vigilante movement, how it grew and the support that it got from the communities. Now, almost the very same contextual factors that led to the emergence of PAGAD have contributed to the other incidences of mob justice that we find in other communities as well.
Right.
And the reason is that the bigger problem is that for as long as people don't have faith in official law enforcement structures, as long as the people are able to see and observe the current chaos that's going on in the police and in the criminal justice system in general, this is always going to create a scenario where people feel, well, if we can't get protection from the formal structures, then we've got no other alternative but to take the law into our hands.
Allow me to jump in there on that note, due to time, constraints there. Just yesterday, we saw a conversation right here on eNCA, with a mother of one of the, young men that unfortunately were killed in this unfortunate attack in Zandspruit. And, she said that it's unfortunate and obviously she feels the pain. His brother also subsequently saying that no human being deserves, to be killed in the manner with which his brother was when we saw those visuals coming in. Prof, I suppose my question is, do we ever see arrests in incidents of mob justice? Should this family expect any arrest to be made regarding, their child, their son, being killed in a manner where a mob is involved?
And that's the difficulty, because it becomes very difficult for the police to go in and investigate these kinds of cases. The reason being that, first of all, because of the tensions between communities and the police, there's always this lack of cooperation that one finds from the communities in terms of assisting the police in their investigations. Reason number two is that often we find that communities, because they have chosen to deal with justice in their own way, they tend to exclude external agencies or external actors from getting involved and dealing with these issues. And it all comes down to the question of to what extent are communities willing to cooperate with formal law enforcement structures when they come in and investigate these incidents of mob justice. The third issue is that in certain circumstances where communities feel that the actions that have been taken against an individual through mob justice, that those actions were justified, where the community is convinced that that individual, that victim, was in fact guilty of a crime, then that will even further cause them to refuse to cooperate with the police, because as far as they are concerned, the people who took action against the alleged victim were actually doing the community a service, because they provided justice where, as far as the community is concerned, formal law enforcement structures
could not, right?
Failed to do so.
I'm about to let you go in just a moment, but before I do, briefly, please, what do you think it would take then? What effective alternative community policing, mechanisms do you think would take, for us to reach a point whereby should the community feel that they've identified a criminal, or they are sure that that particular perpetrator is guilty of a crime, how can they effectively, come up with ways in which to intervene yet not kill the perpetrator? I suppose my question is, a question around effective alternatives around community safety and policing, particularly by community members.
There needs to be greater cooperation between the communities and law enforcement. Unfortunately, there isn't really going to be a lot else that we'll be able to accomplish until this basic requirement is met. The reason being that we have a constitution in this country, we have the rule of law that we as South African citizens are all subject to. And we cannot have a situation where communities feel that they can have their own policing structures and ignore formal law enforcement structures. They can have community policing mechanisms in place. We do know, for example, that we have what we call community policing forums, for example, in different communities. And those community policing forums are designed to be the link between the communities and the formal law enforcement authorities. Now, we need to have a situation where this breakdown in trust between communities and police, that needs to be addressed. Because there's always going to need to be this communication between communities and the police, cooperation between the communities and the police, so that both the communities and the police can work together in order to deal with crime.
We have to leave it there. But thank you so much for your input. University of the Free State Anthropology Associate Professor, Mr. Theodore Petrus, thank you so much for your time.